This past weekend, I taught a paint-along about how to paint weathered wood. So, for instance, the kind of wood you would see on an old barn or shed. This requires a dry brush technique, and the most important thing about dry brush technique is water control. I decided that the companion bonus tutorial in November should be about weathered brick walls. Because if you can harness dry brush technique to paint the weathered wood and rustic stone, you will be able to paint so many different types of buildings and scenes. So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about my dry brush technique and just philosophy about gouache in general. And if you want to watch both of the full tutorials, the links are in the description below. Let's jump in. As of November 2021, my favorite way to use gouache is to do a thin down layer, then work my way up to thicker and thicker gouache on top. Sometimes I don't need to go that thick and I use it much more like watercolor, but most times I like adding 2 or 3 more layers on top. I honestly love gouache because it is so versatile. The brushes I use are flat wash brushes of all different sizes, because in my experience, they hold a little bit less water than the bigger round brushes, which makes water control a lot easier. When I'm painting a scene that requires a few layers in order to build up the depth, especially one like this, which needs a lot of different types of texture, using a larger palette is really helpful because you can have a bunch of different piles, different colors, different amounts of water in each one, and you don't have to constantly babysit your palette or wipe it away and start over again, and you can avoid unwanted mixes or muddy colors. But hey, sometimes we need muddy colors. The grays and browns that happen on our palette naturally are very useful for old stone, brick, and weathered wood. In order to create a dry brush texture, we need to make sure we don't have too much water on our brush, but we have enough pigment. This is where practice comes in, but I'll tell you how I do it, and hopefully that will help you get started. As you saw on my palette, my piles of color are not big, goopy messes. They're mostly thin mixes of slightly diluted pigment. So I sweep my brush through the pigment, and then I dab it on a paper towel in order to remove any excess water, and then with a very light pressure, I just graze it over the surface of the underlayer, and that pigment is applied to the very top of the texture of the paper. So if you're using hot pressed paper, it's very smooth. You have to use a very light touch. Cold press is a little bit easier because it's such a textured paper. So I will continue to build up the layers of dry brush, changing the colors, changing the amount of pigment in almost every brush stroke. And all of these layers, all of these tiny details, all of the variety of colors and brush strokes, they build up and they tell the story. They help convey a texture and a mood, and that is what I love about painting with gouache. You have the option of diluting it like watercolor, but also easily building up the opacity. To me, it is just the perfect painting medium. So my strategy goes something like this. I put a brush stroke down, I wipe off my brush, pick up more paint, put another brush stroke down, wipe it off, pick up more paint. Yes, it's kind of a tedious process, especially if you're painting a lot of repeated forms like a brick wall, but it's worth it. Every now and then I'll refresh my brush by swirling it in some water and continue the strategy, building up my layers little by little. So I hope this little tutorial helped you guys. If you did find this useful, a thumbs up is always helpful. And if you want to see more like this in the future, make sure you subscribe before you go. If you want to watch the full tutorial with step-by-step instructions, check out the links in the description. But otherwise, I will see you all again soon. Take care.